Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Gaspar Noyes and Seb Rose. And we're going to be talking about BDD, example mapping, automation patterns, but maybe we can get a little bit of an introduction first from Gaspar and then go to Seb, and then we can jump into the topics. So how are you doing?
Oh, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Gaspar Nagy. I'm joining from Hungary, Budapest, pretty far away, and I think my official title is now something like a BDD coach and trainer. But actually, I like to keep my hands dirty with coding as well, so I'm just doing a little bit of everything. I have software development background, by the way.
And I'm Seb Rose. Hello, I'm in Scotland, near Edinburgh. Uh, I'm also a software developer long term, and now mainly fiddle around with writing and talking and training about BDD and associated techniques that go with it.
Awesome. Well, to jump right in, let's go into some BDD. You guys have already talked about that a few times. What's on the top of your mind for this topic?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing because at least when I encountered BDD, it was more than 15 years ago now. I thought that, okay, that may be something that is a little bit interesting thing that is changing our way to work in our company, in our project. And I thought that, okay, just like every new idea, it will just go away after a few years, but it just keeps going. And I think it's, at least it's stuck with me. And then I think it still makes sense. And I'm a little bit surprised, or I'm positively surprised that actually that kind of idea or mentality or way of thinking is still relevant for today as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so we should maybe, I guess everyone watching this will know, but BDD stands for Behavior Driven Development, and it's related or has grown out of test driven development. And so there's a whole body of ways of working that's often ignored by people that think they're applying BDD, and people that are using automation frameworks that were designed to work with a BDD way of working. And specifically, it's the red, green refactor. I mean, there's to be honest, there's nothing new in BDD. It's just trying to do red, green refactor at a different level, emphasizing collaboration from the business through to delivery rather than on just the development team. So that's, I think, possibly the reason that Gaspar was positively surprised, because it's not radical and it's not new and it actually doesn't have anything groundbreakingly world-shattering in it. What it's got a bundle of practices that expand on those, good development skills, but also demand quite significant changes to company structures sometimes, certainly with the way you collaborate between different roles and responsibilities, and which is why it's been, yeah, maybe it's still around after 15 years, but it hasn't taken the world by storm, because in much the same way that many companies now have product owners, not project managers, and are still not agile, there are people that have adopted BDD and have never really done the groundwork to change the way they collaborate. They've just tried to use given when then and write some automated tests that can be understood by Cucumber or SpecFlow or Wreck and Roll.
Yeah, I know, we had a period of time where we were trying to get all of the scenarios that we had with all of our given and when thens and have a conversation with the product owner and or product owners, and it was too granular, I think, for them as well. They wanted to be able to maybe use their almost an emotional direction to the software where it's like, oh, this feels right, this doesn't feel right. And so I know that I've personally had trouble bridging the gap between a product manager in a space and the given when then scenarios in Gherkin specifically, but really any of these frameworks. But it still allowed um, for software teams to do higher level testing, which I think makes refactoring easier in the technical aspects rather than maybe London style TDD. So, do you have any advice for people that run into that issue where the technical side bridging the gap with the uh, with the more product side? And do you run into this where it's like it just has to feel right? It's not something that they can identify in specification directly.
So, I mean, the obvious answer is hell yeah, all the time. I mean, it's every place you go. But while I think it's a real problem, there's actually not an issue with the given when then. No matter what you hear
Right.
on the grapevine about how it's really clunky, formal requirements documents are clunky. Customer specifications are clunky. There's always clunky. I think the problem is that you we don't need to force people into going to a granular level that they're not comfortable with.
Right.
And so so Gaspar and I have already self-published a couple of books, Discovery and Formulation, and we talk a lot about this topic in those books. Plug, plug, plug. Um, but uh, but nonetheless, the point is that you can have those conversations, start capturing scenarios that we call journey scenarios, and those are the sort of the chunky things that I expect any product manager to have some opinion on about, what are the big goals we're trying to achieve. But I don't think any product manager really can believe, I certainly hope they don't believe, that by giving a few happy path scenarios and, oh, if it goes wrong, throw an error message, that's going to be enough specification to actually deliver a product. And therefore,
Right.
who's going to make those decisions? Is he going to really let the development team on their own without consulting the customer or the business stakeholder go ahead and make it? No. So if the product manager that you've got in your team is a real high level person, and surely they're going to have delegate the job of specifying the
Right.
finer details to somebody else. And those are the people that should read the lower level, more granular um, scenarios and participate in those sessions where you specify them.
Yeah, absolutely agree. The interesting thing is that obviously these example scenarios at the end they are going to be turned into automated tests, and yes, we will be able to run them. But actually, also in my experience, they are the real value in them is not that finally we will have a test that we can run, but those scenarios and the making of those scenarios and examples is provoking our thoughts.
Right.
And I many times say something similar what Seb was saying, that people were expecting that in an example mapping session or in such a discussion there will be something great things we will figure out about the product. That's typically not the case, but the typical problems that we have in projects, in sprints, are not related to the big things. It's about those small little things that are maybe not the happy path, but everything around, where it's not a huge decision whether we should do A or B, but we have to make a decision because otherwise we will not have a consistent understanding of how we want to make this whole thing round and work together with that. So those little bit more slower level, but still important decisions in the sense that we have to make a decision and we have to somehow make an agreement that how we decide, and also we need to document those decisions because they are not necessarily that important will get forgotten, and then when whatever a couple of months later you have another feature which is a little bit interacting or cooperating or doing something with this thing, nobody will remember whether we have chosen that path or that path. But if we are able to document it with the scenarios, that's a very powerful way to do that. And of course, as a side effect or whatever, we get these tests which are providing a very good starting point for the implementation.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying there that the process of doing the BDD scenarios or refactoring to having domain in the code, the test and the product code brings so much to light that was lurking in the code or lurking in the product. So much so that I'm not comfortable saying this is production ready until we do that. Like, hey, it works. Maybe there's some tests. I got some coverage, but if we haven't refactored it yet to have that domain in there, then I don't think we truly understand it. And you said there's nothing new under the sun with BDD, so to speak, but I think it's still groundbreaking, at least in experience, to see BDD done well versus a fake BDD or no BDD. Because when you don't do it, you often have bugs because the assumptions weren't tested, the scenarios weren't really clearly laid out, so you could feel and see it. So there's been times where I've seen teams resist it and they're just like, ah, it's good enough, and they ship it and then they have bugs. Where when you go through this process of thinking through the scenarios, extracting things and refactoring to have that domain, you realize like, holy cow, we have a gaping hole in this part of the product or in this part of the code. Or we didn't really clearly define what we want to do here, which means when something goes wrong or something happens in the way we didn't expect, there'd be a bug here. And so I absolutely love that. I also absolutely love how it's kind of a natural Chesterton's fence. So, like you talked about reading them a month later, when they fail, it tells a story about why that matters. You know what I mean? As opposed to just the test failure of APA call flux capacitor no longer does X, now it does Z, and here's a giant approval file that's broken. It tells you exactly why this matters to the business. You can trace it from low level all the way to the high level. And I absolutely love that. And so there's my monologue of my love for BDD. But it's great to have you here. And I guess one thing I'm realizing is that you are coming out with a new book, kind of new, or is it a combination of old books? Do you mind explaining that kind of evolution of the first two books and now it's coming out as a new one?
Yes. Do you mind if I tell this story, Gaspar?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we started off working together 10 years ago to write one book, right? So you may remember the Cucumber book, which was what Matt Wynn and Aslak Henosoy wrote about the Ruby implementation of Cucumber. And then some years later, after Aslak had developed the Cucumber JVM, they asked me to port the Cucumber book to be the Cucumber for Java book. And then Gaspar came along and said, "Hey, well, I would like a spec flow book, right?" So the folder that we're working in my machine anyway is still called the spec flow book folder. But after a number of months or possibly years, I made the suggestion that wouldn't it be great to actually split the spec flow book into three books? Because in fact, until you get to automation, the discovery approach of trying to work out what it is you're trying to build, and the formulation practice of trying to write it down in a way that is meaningful and persistent and engages both the business and the developers, those are independent of the actual automation framework. So we then spent another month or year or whatever and released the discovery book. Then we released the formulation book a number of years after that. And we met back in October last year, so that'd be 24 in Slovenia, because why not meet in Slovenia? And I suggested that we go look for a real publisher that might take all three books, the discovery book that we'd released, the formulation book that we'd released, and the automation patterns book that I'm sure we'll talk about later, which is new, and put them together in one book that describes the full BDD approach in an automation agnostic way. So although there will be code examples in the book, the actual patterns that we will be sharing and documenting are, they're language agnostic. Some of them are not going to work in all languages. So we have strictly typed languages, we've got dynamic languages, functional languages. So some of them just won't be appropriate, but nonetheless, the format of the patterns is going to be language independent.
Wait, you're
Yes.
telling me that BDD is not just installing a tool and then I'm done? Like just picking
I would never
that's
tell you
very
anything, Austin. If you want to just install a tool, I could sell you a tool. It's absolutely no problem. Just you write the
Yeah,
check.
but actually we are not that good in selling because we told you the story about the book, but actually we didn't mention the title, did we? No, it's what it is.
It's effective behavior.
Effective behavior-driven development, and it will be published by Manning. So that's maybe the two important bits. It's very interesting. I really liked software design patterns from the beginning or whatever. That was part of our daily language when we were working on our dev projects. And whenever I got into this test automation view a little bit, I was always missing that kind of things in that. and obviously we developed, and everyone is slowly developing a set of tool set that they can use for making better test automation code. But yeah, there was no nice compilation of that, and I mean not like the Gang of Four book, but at least for in the scope of BDD, I thought that it would be great to have such a compilation. This is going to be the third part of basically the book, and also my vision was, and it was easy to convince Seb with that we should do it in a way that we should also interview other people and see what kind of patterns worked for them. We had very great success with the same approach for the formulation. So formulation is basically about how to write nice scenarios. And actually, we all realized that every team has a set of golden rules that they use that use this language, use such kind of basically a list of things that they keep applying as some sort of principles, and basically we did the same. So we were just interviewing them, trying to put them into a list and then played a little bit with that. And that was the same approach, or that was supposed to be the same approach for this book as well. So we interviewed quite many people. We have collected a big list, like 100 items, or I don't know. Of course, what do you call a pattern? And that's not a very exactly defined things. And of course, now we need to shape that list and try to make it to something which is really making a whole. But that's our journey basically, and yeah, it's very challenging. But I think we are enjoying it when we are not super tired, right? Right, Seb?
I enjoy it even when I'm super tired, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's interest. I don't know whether Chris and Austin, you're particularly familiar with patterns. I mean, I know you'll have read, you'll at least have the Gamma 4 book lying around. Whether you've read it or not, I don't know. But there's a really vibrant global patterns community. So patterns started with the architect Christopher Alexander, so it's not doesn't come from software. It was just co-opted by the software industry. But every year, both in the US and in Europe, there is a pattern language of programming or patterns conference where pattern authors bring a pattern paper and get peers to give very frank feedback on it. And the culture that's developed around this is quite well, maybe it's not unique. I couldn't possibly say it's unique, but it's unique in my experience. So you send the paper in and you get assigned a workshop group for the length of the conference. And so there's maybe, I think there's maybe between 5 and 10 groups of people bringing patterns that in each workshop group. And then you have 1 hour long sessions. And basically the pattern author sits in the room at the side, is not allowed to talk, and has to listen to everybody else discuss, critique, and talk about the things that they brought along. Occasionally, they might invite you to clarify something, but you come out of it with a lot of feedback. And so I was very, very grateful to the Europlop committee this year to accept a pattern paper from us, which had 2 small pattern languages in it. And they gave me a lot of feedback, and we threw away a lot of work that we'd already done, and we're still trying to pick up the pieces. But it was all really good feedback, and I'm sure for me, it's going to make the book a much better book, because people who have really lived and breathed patterns for decades, some of them, gave us the benefit of their wisdom.
That conference and that experience sounds like a lot like the liberating structure called Troika Consulting, where you go find 2 people to talk about whatever question you have with you facing away from them, and you only can listen, right? They speak behind your back. So yeah, pretty good. So
yeah, I enjoy it. I mean, it's the European one is in and has been for 20 years in an ex-monastery in southern Germany. Like so many good conferences, it's totally residential. There's no hotels nearby. You have to stay in the halls. Everybody eats together. Everybody goes to the bar together. You do
Cool.
workshops together. They play games together. It's, you know, it's quite, it's quite an intense experience.
Wow, nice, nice. Yeah, and maybe to help bring concreteness to what you're talking about there and this new automation patterns part of your book, what's like an example automation pattern you cover? You know, and I guess a follow-up question would be, how is it similar or dissimilar to like a classic design pattern or like strategy pattern or something like that?
I would say that those are a little bit lower level
Okay.
than what we got used to with the Gang of Four book. So, for example, mm, one pattern that we were initially focusing was what we were calling an ensure pattern, which is basically just how to make sure that if you have to say something, a given step or a when step in a BDD scenario, and that requires some prerequisite actions or state setup to be done, then how to implement that in a way that it still stays maintainable, and those steps are going to be better reusable in other contexts, because maybe there is another scenario where the same a step appears, but have different context before. So such kind of things. So for example, that is one pattern. Um, but also related to some of those things that even the BDD tools support, like that setting up some prerequisites for a scenario like what in Cucumber called the before hook, something like that. How those are working, how to manage the state, the what in Cucumber call the world, the knowledge about the things that the execution and we as readers know about the system while going through the separate steps. So those kind of such kind of examples maybe give you a little bit of idea of what does a pattern mean in this context. So yeah, some useful things that you I was checking in a few of my projects. I'm usually using like a 10, 15 of them in a project. So that also shows a little bit the granularity of them.
Nice.
Is that concrete enough? It's difficult for us because you know we know what we're talking about and we talk about it all the time, and so we kind of shortcut it. Do you think did that explanation give you concrete details? Would you like more? Do you have any questions about that?
Yeah, I think at least for me, that did answer it, right? Because you know, there are, I think when you're talking about, you know, state or how to manage that in a test or in a BDD framework, there's similarities with things you do in production code, but there are things that are different as well. And so I think you're right that it warrants its own pattern, and it sitting at a higher level. Um, Reminds me of Fowler's Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture, which was kind of like a higher level patterns book. Is it kind of more in that ballpark, you would say? Yeah.
But so no, because actually we go down to the implementation. So
So you
we're
do
actually
both.
talking
Yeah.
about how to manage the state. You know, what sort of because every scenario in BD automation suite should be isolated. So you
Right.
can't set up a state and then run half a dozen scenarios, all depending on that state.
Right.
You
Yeah.
need to manage, well, how am I going to set up that network of portfolios that I need to test this special rule that has
Hmm.
to do with
Hmm.
converting from dollars to rubles, you know? And so that sort of thing is quite specific in code. And so sometimes even we even talk about data structures. Not, you know, not hardcore, but you know, you want to separate things so you can look them up independently. One of the things that you'll see in lots of scenarios is that people, if you're talking about an order, for instance, they'll say, if a customer creates an order and then they go to amend the delivery address of the order, and when they come to cancel, and we keep repeating the word order, order, order. But if we were to speak about it, we would use it, right? We'd talk about an order to start with, and then we would use an article because we don't keep repeating the same thing in idiomatic language. And so we have patterns to help manage that. So we store something, and then when we use the word it, we pull the reference back from the scenario state. So yes, it's higher level because we're trying to deal with idiomatic natural language and documentation, but it necessitates talking about data structures and ways of storing things, persisting them for the length of the scenario, and reliably retrieving them when they're needed.
Yeah, so yeah, with other ways of saying, so yes, the solution is very concrete and visualized, or it's in the code. However, the problems that they are solving are not coding problems. So from that perspective, they are similar to these high level ones, because the problems are BDD or testing related problems, but we are solving them through the code. While in the Django 4 book, they were software design problems that they were targeted mainly. So it's a domain specific problems. I think that's what we target with those.
I like that example of storing a variable to reference for it, because that is very concrete. But I think when I've seen Gherkin scenarios written, I often did not see that sort of pattern. Or it would be like, the order does this, the order does that. Uh, yeah.
It's
If
in fact it's tricky, right? So
Right.
and if these problems weren't problematic, we'd probably not be writing a catalog of patterns to address them because we wouldn't have had the problems ourselves and had to do it over and over again and try and not reinvent it, but re-implement it in different domain spaces. So yeah.
I think in every scenario, you don't even just repeat the order, but it's even the order and with the long ID number. And so order 1, 2, 3, 4, order 1, 2, 3, 4, order 1, 2, 3, 4 in every single step. And even that kind of mechanism or that kind of pattern that is needed to be able to, okay, I'm mentioning the order 1, 2, 3, 4 first, and then later on, I'm just referring to those things that we have already mentioned. And the execution environment is somehow taking care of remembering what it was. That's also one. It's a small little thing in your toolbox, but once you have it, it's easier to make nicer scenarios, or easier to automate nicer scenarios.
Yeah, and I think that's key, right? Because the point of it is to make it very understandable, right? And easy to talk about, with a mob or a team or a stakeholder. Um, and you don't want to be distracted by, you know, plumbing that you need, right?
Exactly,
You know,
exactly,
like
exactly.
when I go to use the doorknob, I'm not thinking about the internal workings of how the knob turns and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's one thing I love about the kind of BDD community is it's definitely a move away from the style of tests where it's like you open up a test and it's like, I'm not reading assembly, but it feels like it sometimes, where it's just the first thing that is screaming at you is low-level detail that has nothing to do with why this code matters. And I think a lot of these patterns help. You need that kind of stuff, but it needs to be in the proper place. You know what I mean? Like, not exposed when I open the door, but it's there if I need to take it apart. But for me to just use the door, I don't need that. And so, yeah, I really like that. And I think there tends to be a divergence in the testing community with complexity in tests. So the idea that a test should never be complex enough to need one of these patterns. Um, I have my own response to that, but I'm curious on your all's thoughts on that kind of thing.
You want to start, Seb?
Okay, I guess you don't want to. So the first thing I think we need to stress, because we haven't stressed it yet, although on this interview, although we do stress it a lot of the time, is that BDD isn't about testing, right?
Right.
So what we're trying to do is specify the software that we want to build, and as a side effect, as Gaspar has already said, of going through that process, we end up with really useful automated tests that ensure that the documentation, the specifications that we've written, are either always valid, as in they correctly describe what we've implemented, or when we run a build, the system notifies us that there's been some sort of divergence. So I would push back against the fact that I guess I'm saying that it's not about testing. So if the testing community says they never want to write tests that complex, then I would just say, well, this isn't about testing. However, having worked a lot with the testing community, I think I can say without fear of too much contradiction, that the tests they write are hideously complicated, right? I mean, anyone goes to one of those repository of manual test scripts and you try and work out which test you will need to run to test a particular behavior. And you find that actually what's happened over time is that the test has become extremely long and verbose because the transaction cost of running a manual test is high. So you want to hit as many pain points as you can for each manual test. And therefore, a manual test script tends to grow and accrete over time. So even if it's got a good name and catalog identifier when it was created, by the time you come and look at it 2 years later, it's got half a dozen other concerns and you really don't know which one it was intended to create. So I think one of the things that happens when you move from manual test scripts, or at least that sort of test script, to a BDD style of working with specifications that are granular, is that by reducing the transaction cost of running the tests, i.e., by automating them, it allows you to have each test focus on a much smaller thing, i.e., a single behavior, and therefore you can give it a good name, and when it fails, it gives you a good description. So I guess that the second part then of the answer is we're trying to make them really simple, but to make them really simple, we need to hide all of that complex state set up at the beginning because it's not important.
Yeah, it's very hard to put things into this simple, not simple bucket. So I mean, if you just think about that, if you just fall something and it just falls down to the earth, it's like a simple things, right? Like the apple falls down. But if you just start to unfold it, then you see that okay, there is some hidden complexity behind it. And if you go even further, then you realize that okay, there is a point where no one understands it anymore or whatever. So that and the same happens with testing as well. So that or with this kind of thing. So that we start with a concept that we would like to have a better understanding, but if we want to have an understanding of that, it cannot be that long because I mean there is a kind of capacity of how many lines or how many information bits a human can understand. So whatever, for me it's like 7 lines, let's say, or 10 of a test. If it's more than that, then I'm getting lost in that. But that's just what we are describing, what the intention of us was, or what we wanted to explain. But of course, when it comes to the reality and it finally gets to the final bits, it unfolds. So maybe I'm just saying that yes, the customer has an order, which sounds like a simple statement, and it's a simple statement. But if you go down to your solution space and whatever, you realize that okay, what does it mean that the customer has an order? Maybe a lot of things has to happen, a lot of validation processes. It can nicely unfold, but I think the point is that we should handle the complexity at the right place. So if you are just pulling up the complexity to the front to the test level, then you get these 100 lines, and it's the same. It's just you don't have this possibility to go down and slowly unfold and try to understand the system with some sort of guidance. So that's how I feel about that. And it's a recurring question also in my trainings, that people say that, yes, but in our projects, the tests are much more complex to that. And I like to play some exercise with them, and we are looking at their own tests. And at the end, it turns out that what they are talking about is also a simple thing. Just they have just pulled up all the detailed information to the front line.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with my kids, when I tell them how to drop an apple and see if it made it to the ground, I speak to them in physics, math, and
Yeah.
quantum mechanics and low-level detail. And the toddler seems just fine with it, So I don't know what you're talking about now. No, I definitely follow you. And yeah, I really appreciate your answer there. And not sure if we already covered it, but example mapping, is there any more you wanted to add there?
I think we partly covered. So that I think also our journey in this PDD book series also started a little bit with example mapping. Example mapping is basically just a meeting. It's not a very complex thing. It's a meeting facilitation technique. I think many teams in the BDD space have been doing similar things even before Medwin has just happened to have a few colored index card in his pocket, and when he was visiting a client and whatever, he were just laying out those cards to be able to have a better facilitation for the meetings about discussing those examples. But I think it's very useful that he finally gave it a name, and he described it. And I also practiced it many times before starting to work on the book, and Seb also had a lot of experience with that. And what I like is that that kind of meeting facilitation technique is helping the people to understand what does this collaboration really means here, and or how to do it. Well, maybe they know what collaboration is, but the typical question is that, okay, but I have a meeting starting in 10 minutes. What should I do to be able to do collaboration? Because typically what they do, they just put everyone together in the same virtual room, and somebody is explaining that, okay, these are the requirements, and they are well prepared and whatever. But you have seen probably this, that the collaboration doesn't necessarily start. If you are lucky, then there is a good discussion starting. But if you are unlucky, everyone says, yeah, okay, yeah, looks good. Yeah, let's and tomorrow or whatever, next week, when they really get into the implementation bits, they realize that, we forgot to discuss that. Oh, this is actually contradicting. Oh, this is actually not working. And you have to go back and forth, and that takes a lot of time. However, if you just drop in something to play with in that meeting, and the cards, the virtual cards, the examples, and these are basically stimulating or the people's mind, and trying to move them into this questioning, into this collaboration mode, and that's very great. It's also very interesting that in the beginning, or at least in my teams, we were in these meetings, we were immediately writing down the give and thens. And we realized that that's not really good, because I mean, there was always a good discussion. Okay, what we do, and then we got to the give and then somebody opened up the laptop. That what kind of existing steps do we have? Okay, how should be the grammar, tenses, word ordering, and everyone just falling asleep while these two people were discussing about the beautiful whatever structures in English, and then we supposed to get back into the creative mode again. That didn't work, and example mapping is just doing that. They're just putting aside a little bit the give and then. Let's forget about give and then and cucumber and rack and roll and whatever the exact format. Let's just focus on the what. So what is the example? Just capture it as if you want to sketch it into a post-it card, that's okay. If you want to sketch it in a notepad, doesn't matter, as long as it's shared with everyone. It just helps the people to really go into this discussion, this collaborative mode. And I think this is how our book actually have started, and this is how we also try to understand that this collaboration is a very core part of that. And I think the beauty, or what I really like, and also what you were saying, is that even the automation patterns are about collaboration. And this is also what I have seen with the Django 4 patterns in my early life, that it's not so, the important thing was not that there was a standard implementation of the abstract factory, but the thing was that if I was saying abstract factory to my colleagues, that everyone knew what I'm talking about, and I didn't have to spend the time to explain that. So that this collaboration thinking is basically, or focusing on the collaboration, is go through the entire flow.
I think I'd like to emphasize as well the power of examples, even without example mapping. So credit where credit's due. It was Brian Mark that first created a little laptop sticker that said, I think right about now I could do with an example, or something like that. If you see a requirement, it's generally a level of abstraction that allows for some misinterpretation. And then you think to yourself, well, how is that actually going to work? And typically in my early developer life, I would get these requirement document, and this was pre-Agile, so there was no user story, and there was no grooming or planning like that. I would get a requirement, and I'd be allocated it by the project manager. I would sit down at my desk, and I would think about, what do I need to do, and it'd start writing code, because I was just a code monkey, right? So I'd be typing on the keyboard, and then I'd think, oh, there's an if here. What's the else? Oh, it's not there. So you go back and you go, well, what happens if there aren't enough numbers in the bank account? What happens if the bank account's got a letter in it? All sorts of questions. Whereas if you're actually asking people in a collaboration session in a structured way to think about all the problems that they might have, challenge me as the product owner, ask me what will happen in edge cases, or if the data is incorrect, or validation fails, or the network goes down, and you capture that on a card. It actually promotes the thought, the inquiring thought of the people who are actually going to have to do the implementation, and that surfaces many, many things. It surfaces bits that haven't been considered. It surfaces assumptions that are not shared between the product owner and the development team. It surfaces, as Gaspar says, conflicts between things that have already been asked for. And if you're not actively engaged in thinking, then you are generally passively engaged in nodding, right? And you need to get your brain really revved up to think for those problems, because that's actually what you're doing. If you were just going straight to coding it, that's what you're thinking. You're thinking about structure, you're thinking about the flow, you're thinking about error reporting. If you're just sitting there reading a user story with some acceptance criteria attached to it, your brain isn't engaged in that level of detail, and so you just nod through. Yeah, that makes sense. Sure, I'll go write that.
Yeah, that back and forth is extremely expensive and uh, often to the point where those documents become almost useless because it's costing more to go back and forth than had you spent all that time planning, writing some scenarios. Um, so in these automation patterns, and when you say an automation pattern, it sounds like you're talking about moving from manual testing to automated behavior-driven testing. Is that more, or is it higher or lower than that?
So I think so. We've talked about automation patterns, but actually the section of the book is called BDD automation patterns.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's patterns of how you automate the creation of a suite of meaningful scenario-based tests.
Right.
And that's basically observing the problems we've had, moving from explicit order one, two, three, four to and how you move in a structured way from having to say, well, given that the power's on, that the database is running, and blah blah blah, and all the setup stuff, you just fast forward to exactly the point in the business process that you need to test the rule. So these are patterns of test automation, uh, uh, the test automation that is supporting a behavior-driven approach, and so we consider them to be BDD automation patterns.
Got it. Yeah,
But
that 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 helps me.
answering to your question, I think automation is very important. So that I mean, not every project is in a stage that they can do it, or they can immediately do it, or it's economical to start with that. Because if it's a big chaos, then maybe just emphasizing the big chaos. But but I think in long term, the value that comes out of automated tests in general is becoming even more higher. I mean, I don't want to bring in AI too much, but obviously, if you ever tried AI, I was playing with different AI agents for development, and I what my primary observation was that the better automated test suite I have, the better results it
Yeah.
will provide, because it can self-test itself, whatever. So that so and obviously that's easy to test with an AI agent, but actually human agents are working exactly the same way. So that the more security you provide them with a good set of test cases, the more freedom you give them to try and find their own ways without causing too much trouble, and having a fear of causing too much
Mhm.
trouble, which is probably even worse than causing a problem. So that's, yeah, I think that's also hopefully visible also in many of the open source projects, that the ones which have a good test suite uh, are easier to collaborate, easier to get. They are easier to find new collaborators.
Yeah, I do a lot of agentic AI lately, and a lot of it um, a lot of the scenarios, I have a lot of systems now that will automatically produce scenarios based on what a manual tester has gone in. So they will go in and produce a scenario, and if it doesn't work, then it'll actually just produce what the prompt will end up be. That'll end up writing a whole bunch of unit tests around that, and then and those behaviors are explicitly called out in the names of those tests. And so that's I think scenario names and the contents of those scenarios, as human readable as they can be, is really important for this like new LLM space that we're in, because they provide so much context. So it's kind of nice that way, and uses natural language, so it knows what it is in the sentence.
But does it really? No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
we
exactly.
won't go into it. We're out of time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been super fun. Having you both on the show. I love what you're talking about with the example mapping. It's really easy on my mind going from concrete, small cognitive load, then deriving the abstractions, and I love it. And so I really appreciate you guys sharing more on that. Before we close down this episode, is there anything each of you would like to share or plug? Starting with you, Gaspar.
Yeah, so thanks for having us here, and we are happy to continue this conversation with anyone else. So I think uh, you can always find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have a chat with anyone who is interested in these topics.
So also thanks very much for fitting us in short notice. Um, I'm also on LinkedIn. I think you should speak to Gaspar. Um, uh, I think we should replug effective behavior-driven development. So it's going to be going MEEP, which stands for Manning Early Access Program, which means we get to release the book before we've written it, or at least before we've finished writing it, and hopefully before this show is released, we'll have a discount code that you can share with your contributors, so with your audience, so that at least they can benefit from having listened to some of this waffle. I would also like to plug. Again, depends when this is going to come out. But in November, Gaspar is and I will be at Automation Star in Amsterdam, which is, well, it's a QA automation conference. And we've been a number of times before, but this time Gaspar is the program chair. So plug for Gaspar. Well done for putting together a great program. And so it'd be great if if any of your audience are in Europe in November. Amsterdam's a lovely place. So come and join us at Automation Star.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show, sharing all this with us, and just sharing the joy of BDD. It's really great. And to our audience, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone you want to have a conversation with on this topic. Maybe you've encountered the kind of cargo cult version of BDD. You just install a tool, say the magic words, given when then, and then business magic happens. If that hasn't worked out for you, maybe share this episode with someone else. Start the conversation on digging deeper into where this BDD goodness comes from and how to get there and what patterns and examples to go through. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, feedback. So please share with us your comments on YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and more. And until next one, have a good one, everybody. See ya.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All right, thank you.